Pope Francis says his critics use rigid ideology to mask their own moral failings. Cardinal Burke and Bishop Schneider call for prayer and fasting leading up to the heretical Amazon Synod. And Pope Francis says all of us, all Catholics in the world, must obey the United Nations. All that and more tonight from the editor's desk. Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt coming to you once again from the offices of the Remnant newspaper. So everyone's talking about this. During a papal airplane presser on his way to Madagascar, Pope Francis said he's fine with criticism so long as the folks doing the criticizing truly want dialogue with him.
To make a criticism without wanting to listen to the answer or to want dialogue is not to seek the good of the Church. It's to follow a fixed idea, right?
Is he joking? 2 of the 4 dubia cardinals died waiting for him to answer their request for dialogue. The filial correction guys are still waiting for an answer from Francis, and last year Francis rather famously said that he would not say one word in answer to Archbishop Vigano's credible criticisms. What is this man talking about? And there's more, of course. With Francis, there's always more. In fact, I'm in admiration of these journalists on the plane. I can't even imagine how they do it. I mean, it must be something like walking into a nursing home with a legal pad and pen during pudding hour and taking copious notes, from old Stan, who says he was in World War II and he also knew Napoleon personally, and taking it seriously. I don't know what to do. I mean, Francis is sometimes it's heresy, sometimes it smacks of heresy, sometimes it's gibberish, sometimes it's just a stream of unbelievable consciousness. I don't know. I mean, maybe he is going into his dotage. I don't know anymore with this poor man. But again, on this plane, he was having a good time. He was really up, full of himself and having a good time. And he also says that he doesn't fear schism.
I'm not afraid of schisms. I pray that there will be none because the spiritual health of many people is at stake. That there will be dialogue, that there will be correction when someone is wrong.
He doesn't fear schism. Well, bring on the great Amazon schism then, Holiness, because obviously you're going ahead with this come hell or high water, which is why guys like Phil Lawler say that they're afraid of the Pope now. Quote, Pope Francis is not afraid of schism, Lawler tweets. I am. That's why I'm afraid of this Pope. Right with you, Phil. Holy mackerel. I mean, I don't know what this guy's up to, but never in my lifetime have I seen so many people in influential positions just exasperated, throwing up their hands. They've had enough of this guy. Last week, of course, we reported that Cardinals Burke and Brandmuller sent letters to the College of Cardinals warning of apostasy and heresy at the upcoming Pan-Amazon Synod. This week, Cardinal Burke and Bishop Schneider they issued an 8-page declaration warning against what they call 6 serious theological errors and heresy and calling for prayer and 20 days of fasting in the run-up to the Synod, which we, of course, completely endorse and agree with and are going to go along with. By the way, this whole thing, we're still seeing so much criticism of Cardinal Burke. He's a coward. He doesn't do enough. I don't understand. Are we looking at the same news? Because I can't even imagine what it would be like at this point if we didn't have a cardinal of the Catholic Church saying some of the things that he's saying. Like I said recently on our website, he's not a blogger. He doesn't have to behave like a buffoon looking for clickbait, but what he's doing is this is steady refusal to back down. Remember, he's an academic. He's not a street fighter. So this is very difficult for Cardinal Burke to continually be in this position where he's resisting. And those of you who are still criticizing Cardinal Burke or Bishop Schneider, you've lost me for sure. But I just would like you to ask yourself, what do you think it would be like if they weren't there? If all you had is, Michael Matt and, other bloggers or whatever out there saying there's something wrong in the Vatican. This is what was missing for so long, was anyone of hierarchical significance who was raising his voice against what was going on in the Vatican, in the Church. We now have Cardinal Burke. I would say, let us pray for Cardinal Burke. Let us let Cardinal Burke know that we are on his side so he continues to do what he's doing, which is basically to give all of us at the lower levels our papers, our marching orders. Continue to go. Get it together. Figure out what he's doing. He needs us to come up behind him now and to continue the momentum. in resisting what's going on with the Francis revolution. And a lot of people are getting the message. I'm not saying it's all because of Cardinal Burke, but all of us are comforted by the fact that we have a prince of the church who's also seeing the problem. So a Monsignor Charles Pope, for example, a respected American priest, he writes an open letter to Pope Francis last week in which he concludes by saying, quote, "I can honestly and painfully say that I'm wearied from being scorned and demonized by you, Holy Father." And this is what the Pope's been doing. If you're a radical nutball, if you're a Nancy Pelosi Catholic, well, he's all for you, very supportive of you. If you're Father Jimmy Martin, he thinks you're just super. But if you're a priest who's trying to, defend the integrity of the faith and the liturgy and the doctrine, you get treated like this. As Monsignor Pope says, you get demonized and scorned by the Pope. You see? Now, this is going to be contagious. Lots of priests are feeling this way. Lots of religious and more bishops, I think, are going to pray that they do, are going to sort of feel this disenfranchisement that's happening because of this Pope. And this is the point of this program tonight. If enough of that happens, and if that begins to spread throughout the church, I don't think we need to be so concerned that it's all over. I think something really important is happening right now, and we can sort of take confidence in that, pray about that, join the effort, which is essentially, by the way, what Unite the Clans is all about. We're just looking around going, oh my gosh, we're not alone anymore. Because again, what Pope Francis has done is he's deep-sixed, he's driven a stake right through the heart of papalatry, the thing that prevented all of us from being able to unite for the past 50 years. We had this weird Protestant caricature of the Pope going, oh, he can never make a mistake, he can never be criticized. They behave like, not that he's the vicar of Christ, but he's Christ himself, and you could never criticize him. I mean, there are some people now that even in the last few months or the last year finally woke up to how absurd that is. That you don't just criticize the bishops and the priests when the guy in charge is telling them all what to do. It's a sin against charity. So we have all these people now that are waking up. They're abandoning papalatry. They're making a stand. Another great example of that, Raymond Arroyo. Hats off to this guy. He's not only is at EWTN now, but now he's at Fox News all the time. Every time I turn on Laura Ingraham, there's Raymond. So he's become a guy of some influence.
Near as I can tell, the progressive winds are blowing pretty powerfully through Rome these days, with appointments, cover-ups, synods going full steam ahead. The truth is, this is all a craven attempt to demonize and purge voices from the Church who dare to question the radical changes underway and the brutal tactics used to enact it.
So we don't want to stand back and say, well, I remember when Raymond Arroyo he didn't say nice things about traditionalists, and I think he accepts Vatican II, so we don't want to have anything to do. That's insane. That's just crazy talk. He is now saying and fighting alongside of us. We're all together in this. Forget about the past. Let's just thank God that we have some of these people of influence who are now taking a stand. You see? That's what I'm talking about by uniting the clans. There's so many examples that come to mind. This guy, George Neumeyer, as far as I know, he was never a traditionalist, and he wrote a book called The Political Pope, which we reviewed in The Remnant last month. And he starts his critique out by saying, from the first moment that I saw him, I knew that he was going to be a modernist wrecking ball, says Neumeyer about Francis. Well, I felt the same way. I was standing there at the conclave. I sat there and watched him come out on the loggia of Francis. And I was with my friend John Rao at the time, and both of us felt like somebody walked on our grave. But that's the reaction that Francis is now having all the way across the board. And we as traditional Catholics now can look at all these different reactions and say, this is an opportunity, friends. This is a moment where we need to use our heads. We don't just stick to our old talking points. We need to use our head. What can we do here to push the truth, to push the Catholic counter-revolution further in the right direction now that there are so many people waking up? Speaking of waking up, in the next print edition of The Remnant, the highly respected Vaticanista, the journalist, Aldo Maria Valli, this is the guy who first made Archbishop Vigano's letter on Cardinal McCarrick public. He was the guy that Vigano went to, trusted this man, gave him the letter, and he put it up on the internet. He gives an interview to The Remnant, which is interesting in and of itself. And in that interview, which is going to be on the September 30th issue of The Remnant, so if you're not subscribing to The Remnant, you're missing some great stuff. This is by far, and I'm going to give a little commercial to this next issue. This is, as far as I'm concerned, is the most important interview that I've read anywhere in a very, very long time, mostly because of who it is, but also of what he's saying. And he makes this point. He says, quote, "This Pope is working." Now remember, this is not a traditional Catholic. This is a Vaticanista. This is a journalist in Rome, okay? He's close to the epicenter of the whole thing. And he says, quote, "This Pope is working not to confirm the brethren in the faith, but rather to confound them, not to transmit correct doctrine, but rather to transmit his own personal ideas, not to entrust the church to the care of holy pastors, but rather to place her in the hands of morally corrupt men." End quote. In this interview, he also says, I guess I'm a traditionalist. I'm a traditionalist. I see it now. And this is just so relevant and so important, again, because it speaks to this idea that, all right, maybe it's the end of the world, maybe it's not, but we have a lot of people who are getting ready to fight. Let's see where this takes us. Robert Moynihan, another guy who's he's been a friend over the years. He was never a traditionalist. He actually interviewed Archbishop Vigano, which is a story in and of itself, that a man that close to the epicenter, he had highly respected, permanent accreditation as a journalist in the Vatican, that he would even interview Archbishop Vigano, who's in hiding for his life, by the way. Moynihan interviews him, and he asks a rather probing question. He says, when Vigano's talking about this plan to destroy the church or to undermine the church or reform the church, and Moynihan says, do you think that this plan, does it go back as far as the French Revolution of 1789? Vigano's response is really interesting. He says, certainly. It is a project, if you will, that goes back centuries, in particular to the creation in the middle of the 1700s of Freemasonry. Now, I'm just going to stop there and let that set in for a second. Archbishop Vigano, in hiding for his life, who's put everything on the line in order to expose the corruption in the church, he's now pointing to Freemasonry, to the hand of the Freemasonic in this effort to undermine the traditional Catholic faith. Do you realize how significant this is? And of course, Archbishop Vigano is absolutely right. Cardinal Leo Joseph Suenens, a leading voice at the Second Vatican Council, he admitted this 50 years ago when he said, quote, "Vatican II is the French Revolution in the Church." Cardinal Yves Marie Joseph Congar, another theologian of Vatican II, if you will, he said something similar. He said, quote, "The Church has had its October Revolution. The Declaration on Religious Liberty states the opposite of the syllabus of errors," end quote. Now, the Declaration of Religious Liberty, Dignitatis Humanae, some say that's like the Declaration of the Rights of Man in the Church. It was the Church's surrender, if you will, to the errors of the Enlightenment, to the modern world, lowering her colors, reneging on her own dogma that she is the sole means of salvation. That's what happened at Vatican II. So, and that's, again, we had this hashtag Vatican II. Some people misunderstood it. We weren't saying to hell with the Council Fathers. In fact, I specifically went out of my way to say a lot of the Council Fathers, like Archbishop Lefebvre, had beautiful intentions. They were trying to do the best at a very difficult time at that council. So we're not saying to hell with them. We're saying to hell with this revolutionary event. And I get in trouble because I say, I don't even care about the 16. 16 documents are problematic. There's all sorts of problems in and out of those documents. There's also a lot of good things in those documents. People say, well, Lefebvre never accepted any of it. Yes, he did. In his open letter to confused Catholics, Archbishop Lefebvre said, "I accept in this council and in the reforms all that is in full concordance with tradition." Does that mean he liked Vatican II? Of course not, and neither do we. But this is the problem. We need to move away from these sort of safe little narratives that are based in ignorance. We reject all of Vatican II, do we? Do we? Even the infallible dogmas that were reiterated at Vatican II, that we must accept in pain of mortal sin? Do we reject those too? You see, this is tricky. It's complicated. I'm not defending Vatican II. So it's much safer, as far as I'm concerned, to say, to hell with that event, that revolutionary event. Move past it. It's like the Woodstock of the church. All these old hippies had their big concert, had their big coming out party. No one cares. Kids don't care. It was a disaster. Everything that came from it has been disastrous. And we're now in 2019 saying, enough. We're done with it. It failed, you see? And now here we are, Vigano admitting that Freemasonry is involved here. Well, welcome to the Church of Vatican II, where we now have the Roman Pontiff himself on the same airplane, Pope Francis, telling us that all Catholics need to obey the United Nations. It's just, I can't even believe that we're reporting this. But on the plane to Madagascar, you can look it up. It's on the Vatican website. I think Edward Penton broke the story, for at least as far as I'm concerned, first in English, but then I went and checked the Vatican website. And sure enough, his translation is accurate. Penton's translation is fine. And here's what Pope Francis said, quote, "When we acknowledge international organizations and we recognize their capacity to give judgment on a global scale, for example, the International Tribunal in The Hague or the United Nations, if we consider ourselves humanity, when they make statements, our duty is to obey. We must obey international institutions. That is why the United Nations were created. This is absolutely stunning. You know, Pius XI, Pius XII said, you have an obligation, all men on earth have an obligation to obey Jesus Christ because he's the king and we must obey. Francis is saying we have an obligation to obey the demonic United Nations. And you know what, Francis? You're dead wrong. You can take your lie and go peddle it with your pal Jeffrey Sachs and the rest of the New World Order wackos, but you are dead wrong. God is our creator. We are his creatures. Without God, we could not and would not exist. We owe him everything. Those who are created have an absolute obligation to obey their creator and his law, not the pro-abortion, pro-contraception, pro-sustainable development wackos at the United Nations. Your holiness. I mean, this is insane. No one can defend this. You cannot possibly defend this. And we have basically two ways of looking at what's going on. Either it's the end of the world, and we just get under our beds and pray, or it's an apocalypse of a sort. Not the apocalypse, but an apocalypse. And we need to stand together against it. You see? We don't know which it is. Maybe it is the end of the world. Maybe it's not. But we need to stand against it just as the Catholics united under Bishop Athanasius, St. Athanasius, had to stand united with him against the Arian heretics who had infiltrated the hierarchy all the way to the top. I know some say that Pope Liberius didn't go all the way, but it was pretty darn close. The church was full of heretics. And people stood with Athanasius against the heretics, and they weren't sure any more than we are, the ramifications of all that. Of course, the Code of Canon Law had not been set up at that point, but the idea is the same. We need to stand and resist because we know the truth. We're not inventing anything new. We can't go along with this. And so in our humility, we simply say to God, you're going to have to straighten this out. And in the meantime, we resist it. We will not go along with it. So yeah, maybe it is the end of the world, but maybe it's not. And either way, Francis's growing list of critics now includes some powerful people, and we need to evaluate this. As I say, I don't think it's time for us to conclude this is the end and to go under our bed and just say our prayers and hide and wait for the asteroid. I don't think that's it. Because God is giving us these signs. We're seeing cardinals, okay, they're not coming right away. But you know what? We are traditional Catholics. We have been talking about the diabolical deception in the church for an awful long time. So the fact that Cardinal Burke or Bishop Schneider or Cardinal Seurat is not a Bishop Lefebvre yet shouldn't surprise any of us. We should certainly understand that. There's been deception. There's been deception at the highest levels of the church. And these good men are coming back. You see, they're coming back to tradition. We have cardinals, bishops, influential media people even political strategists, such as the man who put Donald Trump in the White House now, standing against the Vatican of Pope Francis. And you think that doesn't mean anything, that we shouldn't at least give that a try? Francis is worried about it. He's now threatening us with schism, isn't he? And why is he threatening us with schism? Because he's afraid. He's afraid that if the clans unite, something bad might happen to his plan. He's afraid that if enough influential Catholics united with men like Cardinal Burke and Schneider and Seurat and the rest of them, if enough of them rise up against him, he's going to fail in his mission to modernize the church, to destroy the traditional Catholic Church. Remember, he promised us he was going to change it so it could never be changed back? That's looking a little shaky right now. Because we're mad as hell, and we're coming back, and we have leaders wearing the red. We have cardinals, even, calling for prayer and fasting against what Francis is doing. And by the way, we're not surprised as traditional Catholics. We're not shocked by Francis. Oh, I'm so scandalized. Where did this guy come from? For 50 years, the remnant has been shouting from the housetops that the church has been infiltrated by these guys. Francis was always coming. A Francis was always inevitable. But you know what? And I'll conclude on this, because I see the hand of God here too. What we saw when Michael Davies and myself and my father and Lefebvre and everybody back in the days, back in the 70s, what we saw in the future was a Felsenburgh, like some just brilliant Luciferian genius stepping out of the novel A Lord of the World. Everyone would be deceived. including us. The elect would be deceived. That's what we saw coming. We never anticipated Francis, an arrogant ideologue who all of a sudden has inadvertently ripped the mask off the whole revolution because he's so proud. He can't hold it together. He can't hold it back. He ripped the mask off Vatican II. Everybody now knows it thanks to this character. They can now see it's not just him. It's the council. It's the whole modernist revolution and the Protestantized liturgy and the watered-down doctrine and the whole plan to hoist the white flag of surrender in the face of the modern world. You see? See God in this, my friends. I lived through it. I remember when there wasn't any hope at all. And now we're looking all over the place. We got allies. We got people who are beginning to wake up. You see? We know that God's going to save the church. Well, friends, I think it's beginning to happen at this dark moment when things seem to be so low. Something is changing. This is the moment for faithful Catholics to rise up and, yes, unite the clans against the whole modernist revolution. So every father, every mother, every thinking, breathing Catholic, yes, needs to unite in holy and prayerful opposition to this agenda that's going on and unfolding in Rome right now, this disaster. We hold fast to tradition. We pray our rosaries and we resist. And here tonight in this program, I'm not reasoning as a theologian. I'm not a theologian. I'm just reasoning as a simple common man, using common sense because essentially the Catholic faith is reasonable. You can understand it through common sense, and it doesn't make sense to say that we have to obey, even when the guy we're obeying is wearing red pajamas and he's got horns. Well, the church says we have to obey. This is a cult, not the Catholic Church. We have to do something that's real simple. We have to stay in the church. We don't go off and start our own church. We stay in the church because it's ours. And we work to get the church back. We work to get the buildings back. I said it the last time I was in the Chartres pilgrimage. We got to work until Notre Dame is ours again. And I think that's going to happen. It's just a matter of time as long as we, again, can get out of our own way, do the right thing, unite, say the prayers, go back to the Mass, resist them. You see, we need to stay in the church because the church right now, we need her. We need her sacraments, and God in his providence has provided all these young priests now. These young priests are still hearing their vocations from God. They're giving us the sacraments. Don't you see God's providence in that? But let's look at it a little differently. As soldiers of Christ, yes, we have a duty to die rather than deny the old faith. But friends, looking around now and what's happening in the church, I think we should call it an honor. We have the honor, the singular honor, to become part of the glorious Catholic Revolution. It's like the Dickens thing, right? It's the worst of times, it's the best of times. Yes, it's the worst of times. This is the worst revolution to ever hit the church. It's also the greatest counter-revolution of all time. And for whatever reason, God, in his mercy, has given us a chance to see the truth. And he's also put us here for a reason, to maybe do something, to do whatever we can, to use the talents he gave us, to try to do something for Mother Church, because she's done so much for us, right? To defend her, to stay with her, and to say to her enemies, you will not intimidate us. We will keep the old faith. We will defend our mother. We will defend the bride of Christ. And if you want to persecute us for that, you little weasels, go right ahead. Because you're only going to guarantee your own defeat. Every child knows that martyrs have always beaten empires. Every child knows that martyrs have always had the last word against tyrants. The church is built what? She rests on the bones of children, little martyrs who defeated the Caesars. You see, we have nothing to be afraid of other than losing the faith. And we're not going to do that. If we stay together, pray the rosary, keep the old faith, do not be deceived. And if God so wills it, there will be martyrs among us too. And I'm not looking forward to it, but there will be martyrs. But first, before we even are called to the great sacrifice of martyrdom, let's go on offense. Let's go to war. Let's become crusaders. Let's become soldiers of Jesus Christ. And if this is the end of the world, well, let the end of the world find us standing as soldiers of Christ against the Antichrist, wherever they are. And in a few weeks, if you want an example of this, I'm so fired up. I want to share it with you. Remnant TV is going to be in Rome just before the Amazon Synod. And I'm so thrilled to join some of these guys, like my friend John Henry Weston and his team at the Voice of the Family on October 4th in Rome. And there's going to be several other demonstrations organized by courageous Catholics who, just like you, just like me, have had enough, and they know what's at stake. I'm going to conclude this program tonight by begging you, please, pray the Rosary for the success of these initiatives that are coming up now. They're organized, they're effective, they're going to make a difference. Tell your friends, tell your families, right? It's not over. Don't give up. Don't leave the church. The Catholic clans are uniting for the battle of their lives, the battle for the preservation of the old faith. And once again, friends, we have the chance and the honor to be a part of that, to be a part of this history-making moment where the Catholics stood for the bride of Christ and made the difference by keeping the faith. Now they're even threatening us with schism in the Vatican. And what does this all mean? It means that they failed to win us over. It means that they failed to drive us out of the church, that they failed to make apostates of us. Praise God. And now we're coming for them. We're coming for them with a promise. We are soldiers of Jesus Christ. We're united in the faith of Jesus Christ and his church. We will oppose you with everything we have. Until our last breath, we will raise our children in the old faith with the old Mass, so that they will live, so they will survive this modernist reign of terror of yours, so that our children will live to see the day when the Immaculate Heart of Mary will triumph over you all. There's going to be a schism, all right, Pope Francis, but you're the schismatic, not us. We're not going anywhere. This is our church, and we'll defend her to the end. Please, God, and may Mary intercede on behalf of all of us to make good on this promise. I'm Michael Matt from Remnant TV, and we'll see you next time.